All right, hello. This is going to be a quick tutorial on how to get started in S&box with networking. There's a few basic things you need to know about networking. One is that everything should work as it would in a single player instance. In terms of your game objects and your components, everything should work the same. The only difference is that some game objects will have ownership, and some game objects will have different networking states. So you can see underneath the enabled button on a game object, its state. You can have an object that is never networked. So if it exists on the host client and it has never networked, and another client joins, they will not be sent this object. It only exists on the client that it was initialized on. Network object means that the object is networked, whether it has an owner or not. And if it has an owner, it means that the owner is simulating the object. And if it has no owner, then the host is simulating the object. You must have this enabled if you want to use sync variables or broadcast functions. And then snapshot is the default behavior, which is it is sent to any client that joins in the future, unless it's deleted. So ownership, how do you give ownership in S&box? If you go over to the S&box documentation here, we can see that ownership can be set via a few different functions or different methods here. A bunch of different ways to set it. But the biggest and easiest way to get started is via a built-in component called the network helper. Now what this component does is it will automatically start a server for you if you're not in one. It will initialize a prefab for your connection, and it will allow you to specify a few spawn points, so your prefab is created at one of the random spawn points. And if you have a map component, it'll automatically use any map spawns in your map instead of the spawn points. If I call this test object, and I drag this down here to create a prefab for it, and I'll delete it in the hierarchy so I don't actually have it, I can put that prefab in the network helper. Playing the scene will spawn that player object, and you can tell that it's that prefab because if I open it up and I add like just a character controller component to it, then this player now has that character controller component. It's just being renamed to player and then a hyphen and the username, and you can tell that that's the owner of the game object because it has the name in blue afterward, and you can tell it's a networked object because it has the networked icon here, and the green means that it's owned by your client. So if I quickly go here to edit project settings, first of all, make sure the organization is not set to local. Set it to an actual organization. Go ahead and save, and then upload your project to Asset Party. By default, it uploads as unlisted, so you don't have to worry about other people seeing it. Then you can run your scene again, and then click the little network icon up here, and then hit join via new instance, and that just opens another instance of S&box. It'll probably open in full screen if those are your settings, but if you hold Windows Shift and then left or right on your keyboard, it'll put it in a little window you can get to like this. So you can see now that that second client is Carson 2, and it has its own game object and its own ownership. You can see that it's networked, but it's not green because I don't own it. So I don't have authority over this object. So to use it practically, I have the character controller that we made before. I'm going to create a network helper, add the network helper component, and then I'm going to make a prefab from this player. And I'm going to drag that prefab into the network helper. And immediately if I hit play, everything should work just fine. And if I want to quickly add spawn point, say I just add a few spawn points here, 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 I can go to the network helper, boom, 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 add the 3 spawn points like that. So now I'll spawn at one of those 3 locations randomly. Seems like it likes to only put me at one. Oh, there we go. So whenever you make a change and you want to test the networking, you have to go to edit and then publish your project. And then You upload the files, publish, finish. You have to publish every single time you want to test. Otherwise, your assets are not going to be fully uploaded to Asset Party for the other client to download. So it will be playing off another version, and there may be inconsistencies. So immediately you'll see that other client connected, and it like reset the view. And when I move around in this client, it's like moving this client. And when I move this client, I actually can't move this client. Oh my God, it's very messed up. And the reason why is because when we made this player controller, it didn't account for any networking functionality. So we only want to run what is inside the onUpdate and onFixUpdate if we own the object, which is super simple to check. We can just say if network.IsOwner. But what we actually want to check is if it's a proxy. You can see here that if it's a proxy, it means that it's being networked to you, which means we don't own it or don't have authority over it. Because you can still have a networked object that has no owner, where the owner is set to null. And what that means is that the host is the one simulating. So IsOwner would be returning false, but IsProxy would also be returning false. When IsProxy is false, that's when you want to control it, because it's not a proxy. It's not being proxied to you. So let's do the same thing down here real quick. If the network is proxy, we'll return early, so we're not running the fixed update or the on update if it's being networked. So I'm going to quickly edit, publish the project, upload those files. Then we can hop in with a new instance. I'm just going to walk over here in advance. Oh, and you'll see that instantly reset me again. And when I walk around, it's moving that shadow. When I walk around, it's still moving this guy. So we're still having some similar issues. But the reason for that now is because the camera movement is a separate object, or sorry, a separate component on the camera, which is part of the prefab. This is something that you shouldn't really do, having the camera part of your player prefab. It's better to have one camera and then have that find your local player. So let's set it up like that. What I'm going to do is just copy it, delete it from the prefab, and then just paste it directly into the scene. And it doesn't really matter where the camera is placed because it'll be positioned in code later. So in the camera movement script, the way I have it set up is it points to the player, the body, the head. It has all this information. So instead, we're going to reference that from the local player. So player already has the head and the body in these two properties. So all I need to do is get the local player movement. And there's a few ways that I like to do this. Public static player movement local, which has a get and only a get, not a set. And then you have a private static player movement underscore local like this, and it defaults to null. So if the local is not valid, if the current local one is not valid, you can just get it from game.activeScene. I think it's get all components. This will only get like root objects, and the way that the network helper already works is it creates this game object as a root component, or as like a root game object. So if your like the parent object is changing at all for your player, you might want to get this a different way. This is just the easiest way to immediately do it, and it requires system.link so that we can do first or default, and then we just want to say network.IsOwner, and then return local. So the underscore local variable is like our cached variable. So whenever you call this variable, or you ask this variable, hey, what do you equal? It checks if this is still valid. And if it's not, then it'll just try to get it again. So you'll ideally only ever have to call this code one time. But with networking, you never know. Sometimes you'll disconnect and reconnect, and the static variable won't get reset as a result. So it still has like an old reference instead of null. So this is just a good safety to make sure that this is always going to return a valid player. So back in the camera movement, what I'll do is in the camera movement, I'll take these and remove them as properties And instead, instead I will change them all to private, and then say player equals player movement dot local, body equals player dot body, and then head equals player dot head. So I have all those cached in the on awake on the camera. Okay, so it's actually giving me an error. So what I'll do is in here in the on update, if player is null, then we'll fetch the player and all of his respective stuff, and then we'll just return early. So before we can test, gotta publish the project, edit publish project, upload files, publish new revision. Let's see what this does. Oh my goodness. And immediately I can see this other client standing right here. And if he moves around, I can see him moving. Now there's a bit of a problem because here I'm not seeing my good friend. I'm just seeing his shadow. Similarly to myself. So that's because in our camera movement, we have the body renderer being set to only draw the shadows if we're in first person. So instead what we want to do is set this based on ownership. So I'm going to remove this from the camera altogether because I know my game in this case is a first person game here. And then in my player movement here, I get the skinned model renderer, body renderer. Say the body renderer equals body.components.get the skinned model renderer. I'll probably do it in the update animations. Above here, I'll say body render dot render type is the shadow render type on. It's going to draw everything if we're a proxy. Whoops, it should be network dot IsProxy. And then otherwise, we only draw the shadows. So if we're not a proxy, we only draw the shadows because we don't want to see ourselves. Publish. You will immediately notice that this also doesn't work, but it's for a different reason. You'll see that when the other client joins here, I can see him. I'm going to fall through the map actually. And the other client doesn't see him at all. I'm falling with him and I can't see the guy. It's actually because it never reaches that code for me on the other client because it's always returning right here. But we want to update the animations on all clients. I actually want to do, I think, both of these guys because these are both animation related and these are both actual movement related. So what we'll do is change this to be if not a network proxy. Do this stuff, but then we're always going to run the animation code. I'm jumping around waiting for my friend. There's my friend. And if I pull him over, I can see the friend on this end as well. And I can see the animations are playing just fine. I can see that when I actually do something, the animation is being reflected. And maybe not all of them, but the reason why is because it is calling that update animations function, but those variables aren't actually the same between each client. So you can see here, for example, is crouching and is sprinting. These are being set on the client that are actually pressing the buttons. It's not being done over the network. So what you can do here is just add sync and then add a getter and a setter. And that just makes it a sync variable. And by default, sync variables can only be modified by the owner of the client, or if you have ownership of it. Publish the project. And we'll see that we can visibly see the guy crouching now. Beautiful. But you'll notice that I'm rotating and the rotations aren't going through. And that's for exactly the same reason. In the rotate body, it's rotating towards this head transform target angle. So what we should instead be doing is having this target angle as a synced angles target angle. And then we can set that in our network thing, target angle. Whoops, get rid of that. So now if I join with my other client, you can see that if I rotate, it's going to change that direction. It's not going to change his head rotation, only because animation update is still based on this head rotation instead of being based on that target angle. So if I go ahead and change both of these, then we should see everything syncing up just fine. So hopefully you can see from all this that there's a lot of back and forth work, a lot of trying to figure out what should be networked, what shouldn't be networked, what should be wrapped in an IsProxy check, what shouldn't be wrapped in an IsProxy check, what should have ownership, what shouldn't have ownership, and then constantly thinking about who is running this code. If it's being run on the client, is it being synced at all? Look at that. Look at that. That head movement is now beautiful. You can see his intentions perfectly. Thing that I'll do here is quickly go ahead and make a little world panel. Make it nice and wide. And this will be a name tag component. I'll make a razor panel component. Throw it in a UI folder in the code folder. All I'm going to do here is say network dot, I think it is owner connection dot display name. That's what I'll display in here, and then I will make that the build hash so it updates based on the username. So if they change their username, then it should update live. Then I just want to make sure that the object is in fact networked. So doing that should make it so when you create this, that it is also owned by you, that child object. And you can see when I walk around, now I'm seeing my name stuck to my face, which is probably not the greatest thing. So what I'll probably do is have class up here and say network.isProxy is nothing. And then if we own it, it'll be hidden. Then in here, I'll just say and hidden display none. So now I can't see it over my face anymore, which is great. So let's just make sure that it's positioned properly in here. And then I'll have it look at the camera. Publish. We'll see when our guy joins. Boom, he has a beautiful name tag of Carson 2, because that is in fact his name. And if I come over to this other client, we can see that my first client has the name tag Carson, and I can't see the name tag above my head on my respective client, only on the other client, because it is doing that check for network IsProxy. And I would probably also put this in the build hash just in case that happened to change, but I don't see that being a thing you would change unless you like dropped ownership of your players, which you could. So just worth thinking about, keeping that in mind. Some other quick pro tips. If you change your code live, so I've just added that other div there, you can see it immediately propagates code changes to connected clients. But any asset changes will not. So if I go ahead and change on my body here, if I make my player red, that's not going to propagate, like he's not red now for the server. That has to be a change that's done on the other client through like an RPC. So how do you do something like that? The best way to show something like that is if I just simply go into the on update here. I'll put it in the IsProxy check, so you can only do this if you are yourself. Input dot pressed use. So if you press E, we're gonna broadcast message is what I'm gonna call it. So an RPC in this is called a broadcast. So if I make a function called broadcast message, all I need to do is add the broadcast attribute, and now it is going to be sent over the network, and this code is going to be run on all other clients. So if I do log.info, hey, I just broadcast this message. I can publish, upload. So now on the connected client, if I press E, you'll see in his client, it showed the console message, and on this the server host, it played the message. And then if I respectively on the server host, press the button, you'll see now it has been sent again to the client, and it was ran a second time. That's what this one means, because there's one additional stacked here. So a good practical use for the broadcast would be here, when you call the jump, it's triggering an animation, but that's only triggering the animation on the client that's calling the function. You can see here in our reference that it's being referenced by the client who's doing the jump. So you'll jump on all clients, but it'll only register the jump, the animation, on this client. So what we do here is broadcast jump animation in our jump, broadcast jump animation, and then move that code into here and simply throw it in a broadcasted function. It's that simple. So now whenever I jump, that animation will be played on all the clients, even though it's only being called from the host. And the reason why I don't want to put this in everything is because the character controller should only be controlling things on the host side, since our position, rotation, all of our transform information is automatically networked and interpolated between. And you can tell that it's being interpolated between if you spawn your guy here. That's what this icon is next to the networking. So if you turn this off, it won't interpolate automatically. You can do that manually at that point. And there's functions you can use to call the lerp and all that. So you can take full control of everything here. So that's the basics of all the networking stuff. This is enough to basically spark the journey. So you can actually start doing stuff. And then obviously I would constantly be referencing those official Facepunch docs, because they have everything you need to know in terms of networking. Because S&box is always evolving, it's just best to always reference the docs just in case anything changes.